Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. There has been a lot happening since the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and I wanted to cover some of it today. I told you originally when we did the podcast about Charlie Kirk and who he was and this type of thing, that I really didn't want to get into at that time the negative things. I didn't want to get into what people were saying that didn't like him and didn't agree with him and all that kind of stuff. It just wasn't the time for that. And I said that we would do a little more about that later, and we are going to do some of that today. It's not going to be the entire podcast, but we are going to cover some of that. And I wanted to just kind of bring us up to speed on where we are at now, because this was such a terrible thing, and it affected so many people here in the United States and around the world. And what happens when bad things happen is it tends to change a society, it tends to change a people. What we saw, I mean, give you a great example. The Great Depression, for instance, changed an entire generation. It made that generation more frugal. it made them appreciate what they had, and understand that what we have is not guaranteed. And so and obviously each generation down from there, and we've kind of forgotten some of those some of those things that we learned during that time and that generation learned, but you still see effects, and the closer you get to that generation, the more effect that you actually see. And I think even things like 9/11 and that type of thing had an effect on this country and how people think about things, and so these points in time where there's negative things, we often see changes within a society. And I truly believe that the Charlie Kirk assassination is one of those things that will change the way people think in many ways, and it will change people's lives in some cases. I mean, if just to take an example here, we have the Charlie Kirk show that now is being run by Megyn Kelly and Erica Kirk. The very first show that they did after the assassination, the very first episode with those two, they had 1 billion, I'm talking with a B now, 1 billion views of the Charlie Kirk show. And you can say, well, that was his first show, their first show on the Charlie Kirk episode 1. And so, right after the assassination, everybody's going to want to tune in and see what Erica Kirk says and things like that. Well, the second episode came out, and guess what? We have 1.5 billion views on that one. So, yeah, I mean, this is something that has hit people and hit people hard. And so I wanted to cover a couple things about what's happening. And to do that, we needed to start out with some of the negative stuff and the way that some of these liberal leftists, they just can't help themselves. They just cannot view reality. They can't see the forest for the trees, and they can't understand exactly who this guy was and why he was so important to people. And let's talk about this a little bit. And I wanted to pull up a representative type of thing, because there's a number of people out there that are saying some pretty terrible things about Charlie Kirk. And one of the ones that I brought up here was Christopher D. Cook. He writes for Common Dreams, and this was, get this was the day after the assassination. So yeah, he didn't wait, didn't want to see what the reaction would be or whatever the case may be. He put this out there the day after the assassination. All right. So in this, he says, in the wake of Charlie Kirk assassination, part of a distressing wave of political violence stalking this country, it would seem that the United States is coming apart at the seams, poised at the precipice of disintegration. So much hatred, so much anger, so much toxic rot, and so many, many guns. All right, let's stop there just for a second. Um, so I like how he says, there's so much hatred, so much anger, and yet where do we see that coming from? I mean, I love the memes that came out after Kirk's assassination, where it was like a split screen. The top of the screen is, this is the way the left reacts, and it showed, right after George Floyd and the riots and the burning down of whole, neighborhoods and all this kind of stuff. Everything's on fire type thing, right? Mostly peaceful protesting. and then the bottom half of the meme shows the prayer vigils that went on after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And a lot of times they would say at the bottom of that, it would say, we are not the same. And that kind of, it holds true. I mean, we have a difference here of reactions depending on whether it was right versus left assassinations. And in the case of, obviously, George Floyd, it wasn't even assassination. And in the case of George Floyd, he died of drug overdose, not the police. But at the time, not everybody understood that. So anyway, the point remains that the reactions are not the same, and yet he's like, there's so much anger, so much toxic rot, and so many, many guns. So if there's less guns in the hands of legal individuals, then we're going to get less of this kind of thing. How many assassinations would be stopped if we just had less guns? But I digress, okay? He goes on to say, we are boiling a poisonous stew. Can anyone save us? Is there anyone or anything that can possibly cool us to a simmer, at least? At this time, it appears not, in fact. Frighteningly, the rage that got us to this grim, spooky moment seems only to be spiraling. Charlie Kirk, he said, had barely been declared dead when President Trump hideously, I love his adjectives here, hideously used his killing to falsely blame the attack, blame and attack the left. Okay, let's stop there. Number one, we already knew what this guy's motivation was. Okay, they already had the shell casings. They already had that he had written on. They already had information on who it was and what his Facebook profile and all this they already had that. Okay, and so we already knew what the motivation. What the motivation is not the question mark. We already know what his politics were and why he killed Charlie Kirk. But what this guy is doing is he's saying that he falsely, it's what he said, to falsely blame and attack the left. How is that false? There is nothing false about that. Okay? He goes on to say, Trump seized the moment of widespread mourning to spread more hatred and division in a reckless, angry, televised speech that hurled blame at the left despite not a scintilla of evidence about Kirk's assassination or their politics. Okay. Again, all right? They knew what was going on. To say that there was not one scintilla of evidence here about Charlie Kirk's assassin or his politics is completely false and out of left field. Okay, this guy is lying. This guy is a liar. Okay, they know what his politics were. They are telling you what his politics were and what his motivations were. And here he's saying, no, you're just using it for political gain. He goes on, in a predictable yet grotesque display, Trump raged. Don't you love all the adjectives? Quote, for years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today, and it must stop right now, unquote. What's wrong with that quote? Is there anything wrong with that quote? No, there's nothing wrong with that quote. What Trump is saying here is that Charlie and others, including Trump himself, have been called Nazis, have been called fascists, have been called every like come up with a terrible name. I mean, the only one I haven't heard is vampire. I mean, they call him every single thing they can that would enrage people and want to make them do something. And usually, or in some cases at least, violently. Okay? There's nothing wrong with what Trump just said there. But he goes on to say Trump went on to enumerate the attempts on his own life, the shooting of the United Healthcare CEO, the shooting of Steve Scalise, and attacks ICE agents. Zero mention of the assassinations of Democratic Minnesota lawmakers or others who didn't fit Trump's vision of worthy right-wing martyrs. Okay, that had nothing. There's no comparison there. Okay, I mean, if you want to, that's fine. But what Trump was doing here is saying, hey, look at all these major deals here. Look at all of this, and he gave several examples, and then he said, well, but he didn't bring up this one little one over here in this state of Minnesota. He said the man who said there were good people on both sides of the Charlottesville killings by right-wing white supremacists could not bring himself to even mention the tragic shootings of people on the other side of the political aisle. Okay. So good people on both sides. We've done. I've addressed this on the podcast before, but for those that have not heard that, let's play Trump's statement. Okay, I'm going to play it. You can hear it for your own self. I'm not going to read it. I'm going to play it, and you can hear what Trump is saying when it came to that "find people on both sides" comment. Ready?
And you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group also, you had some fine people, but you also had troublemakers, and you see them come with the black outfits and with the helmets and with the baseball bats. You had a lot of bad people in the other group too.
Treated unfairly, sir. I'm sorry, I just didn't understand what you were saying. You were saying the press has treated white nationalists unfairly? No, I just didn't understand what you were saying.
No. There were people in that rally, and I looked the night before. If you look, there were people protesting very quietly the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. I'm sure in that group there were some bad ones. The following day, it looked like they had some rough, bad people. Neo-Nazis, white nationalists, whatever you want to call them. But you had a lot of people in that group that were there to innocently protest and very legally protest because, I don't know if you know, they had a permit. The other group didn't have a permit. So I only tell you this. There are two sides to a story. I thought what took place was a horrible moment for our country, a horrible moment. But there are two sides to the country.
All right, so that right there was his comment. Okay, that was the good people on both sides comment. So now you understand that he wasn't talking about white supremacists. He wasn't talking about those that would kill somebody. Okay, that's not who he was talking about when he said there were good people on both sides. He said there were protesters that were peaceful on both sides, and that those ones even had a permit. Okay, so to say that well, coming from a guy who said there was good people on both sides when talking about white supremacists, that is being disingenuous. And he goes on to say here, look, soon after Kirk's murder, Representative Nancy Mace, a Republican from South Carolina, lunged for the political jugular, telling reporters, quote, Democrats own what happened today. Some raging left lunatic put a bullet through his neck. Mace hurled this profoundly reckless, irresponsible attack without a shred of evidence about the assassin's politics. Okay, I mean, we are weeks out now of that assassination, and was she right? Yes, 100%. Was he right, Donald Trump? 100%. Okay, so this is absolutely outrageous. He goes on and says, these are not the people who are going to lead us out of this ugly, toxic pit. They, along with Charlie Kirk, led us into it. Kirk became a wealthy influencer by spreading toxic rage and fear and division. We can honor the sadness millions are feeling over Kirk's murder and maintain basic civil human decency while, I don't know what, you've kind of thrown that one out the window, while also being honest about the deeply harmful and offensive things Charlie Kirk said. We can condemn political violence and Kirk's murder while also condemning Charlie Kirk for the rotten, vile hatred he fomented. That's ridiculous. He says, and yes, while respecting that many are mourning, this is precisely the time to remind people of the hatred and division Kirk sowed and profited handsomely from. Consider what Kirk said about black women leaders and affirmative action. Assailing affirmative action picks Joy Reid, Michelle Obama, Ketanji Brown Jackson, and Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, Kirk said. Sickeningly. There we go. Quote, you do not have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken seriously without affirmative action. You had to steal a white person's slot, unquote. He says, let's sit with that for a moment. Charlie Kirk said these exceedingly smart, strong, successful black women do not have brain processing power. This is the supposed hero for whom Trump lowered the flag to half-mast. Okay. This is absolutely ridiculous. He goes into character assassination, and that's what this is. Charlie Kirk got assassinated, and now this guy is trying to assassinate Charlie Kirk's character. What he said is absolutely ridiculous. It's untrue. And if you don't believe me, here is what Charlie said.
You really have to wonder. In fact, if we would have said 3 weeks ago, Blake, if we would have said that Joy Reid and Michelle Obama and Sheila Jackson Lee and Ketanji Brown Jackson were affirmative action picks, we would have been called the racist. But now they're coming out and they're saying it for us. They're coming out and they're saying, I'm only here because of affirmative action. Yeah, we know. You do not have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken really seriously. You had to go steal a white person's slot to go be taken somewhat seriously. Play cut 52.
All right. He goes on to talk about what he is and explain what he's talking about here. Okay. What he's talking about here is affirmative action. Okay. I could play cut after cut after cut, and I could give you all kinds of information on who he hired and all this kind of stuff. He was not racist whatsoever. What he's talking about is he's talking about affirmative action. In other words, when you have, like, let's say a black female in a slot, okay, and they're there because of affirmative action. Well, then they've taken that slot. The affirmative action part of it means that they weren't good enough to get the job without affirmative action, and that they took the job from somebody who was better skilled or, on merit should have had the job. That was affirmative action. You got into college not because you had the better scores. You got into college above the person who had the better scores because of the color of your skin or your gender. That was affirmative action, and that was shot down by the Supreme Court. I mean, years later, but it was shot down by the Supreme Court. And so that's what Charlie Kirk is talking about here. He's not talking, and he's saying, look, it's not me saying it. It's these people that are saying, I got here because of affirmative action. And he's saying, okay, well, then you got here over somebody else that should have been here because of affirmative action. He's talking about affirmative action. He's not talking about the people themselves. Okay? So to say that he's racist is just out to lunch. He goes on. He says Kirk was an equal opportunity hater who called Martin Luther King Jr. awful and not a good person, while insisting we made a huge mistake when we passed the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s. Okay. Again, more character assassination. You judge for yourself whether he's right or not. Okay? Here we go.
Great question. So Eric Garner, the Attorney General of the United States, recently said that North Carolina and Georgia cannot have voter ID laws. So asking somebody to provide identification when they vote, because it's a violation of the Civil Rights Act. Because they say that it disproportionately impacts Black Americans. So the issue with the Civil Rights Act is not just the action of being of racially segregating or of being racially insensitive or to somebody. It is the impact. So if it impacts a certain group, therefore it's also then called illegal under the Civil Rights Act. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it most certainly wasn't a mistake.
Well, of course it was a mistake. The way it was written, the intent was not. Though.
Yeah. Okay, but at the time, of course, it was not a mistake.
Yes, it was. The way that it was written.
What people have used it for now, maybe yes, but back then it wasn't a mistake though. Because
but you have to just realize it now, right? So it's like saying, well, the law had been good 20 years ago.
Okay. But so you did say, "Oh, I'm against discrimination," but I don't think the civil rights.
No. So one provision I think should have been passed. One provision was good.
You're saying it should have been
should have been whittled down, and it should have been this massive, overreaching monstrosity.
All right, so that right there is what he's talking about. Okay, that's what he's talking. He's not saying he's saying the intentions were good with the Civil Rights Act. He's saying the law that we got was bad because it allows for bad things to happen, like DEI and stuff like that. Right? That's what he's saying. That the effects of what the Civil Rights Act did were bad. The intentions may have been good, and that's what he agrees with, but the act itself, the way it was written, the one that passed there, that is what was bad. It should have been different in order to sustain the good things about the act, the good intentions that were that the act came about from. Now, this guy goes on to say, in his gruesome rage against affirmative action and diversity, equity, and inclusion, Kirk also spat out, "If I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified. That is some deeply racist garbage." All right. This guy he can't understand what Kirk is saying here. Okay? He doesn't get it. He really doesn't get it. What he's saying is that if this pilot was there because of affirmative action, it means he's a worse pilot than somebody who should have gotten the job without affirmative action. And if that's the case, then he hopes he's qualified because his life is in this pilot's hands. Okay? What's wrong with that? That's not racist, and that's not garbage. He goes on to say things like Kirk called gay and transgender people groomers who are destructive, oppose gay marriage, and campaigned against gender affirming care for gender people, insisting, quote, "We must ban trans affirming care. The entire country. Donald Trump needs to run on this issue." Well, yeah. I mean, we do need to fight transgender affirming care because there's only two genders. That was again another thing that Kirk espoused. Um, anyway, it's absolutely ridiculous, and he goes on. I'm kind of done with him. He ends with, "No one person will save us. We can hope and work for a cooling period that at least lowers the flame and slows the spiral. We can all say, stop the violence, stop the shootings, and let's also say just as strongly, stop the hatred, stop the fear mongering, stop the bigotry." Yeah, that would be good. Okay, that would be good. You mean like this? Hank Breen from the Daily Wire reports former Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton aroused the ire of the political right when she satirized the idea of the dominance of, get this, white men of a certain persuasion and a certain religion, unquote, saying that did damage to the nation. Appearing on MSNBC's Morning Joe, Clinton stated by disparaging the political right in answer to co-host Micah Brzezinski, saying, "Are we still headed toward a more perfect union?" "I think right now we're on a pause," Clinton replied. "I think that people are uncertain. Some people are actually scared about what's going on in our country. The idea of we, the people, that all men and women are created equal, that seems to be in the crosshairs of those on the right who want to turn the clock back on the progress that we have made, writing out huge chunks of our history, slavery, suffrage, anything inconvenient. Take it out of the museums, take it out of the national parks." What followed was a not so subtle attack on Christian white men when she said, quote, "So I think that's what makes us so special as a country. And the idea that you could turn the clock back and try to recreate a world that never was dominated by, let's say it, white men of a certain persuasion, a certain religion, a certain point of view, a certain ideology. It's just doing such damage to what we should be aiming for. And we were on the path to that, imperfectly, and lots of bumps along the way. But I agree with you. We are on the right trajectory. We were on the right trajectory." So, here's another quote. It says, "It's beyond tone deaf for Hillary to proclaim that conservative white Christian men are what's wrong with America while the nation mourns the loss of Charlie Kirk." This is Roger Savino of the Heritage Foundation. That's what he told Fox News. Quote, "At least it confirms what we all suspected, that Hillary still believes millions of Americans belong in her basket of deplorables." You remember that one, right? She is so bad. Here's another one reacting to it. 2 weeks after Charlie Kirk's assassination, Hillary Clinton reminds everyone that white Christian men are dangerous and doing damage to America. These people have no intention of turning down the temperature. They know they're encouraging what happened. And lastly, Hillary Clinton makes yet another case for violence against white Christian men. "The constant drumbeat against huge segments of the population is dehumanizing and dangerous. Her focus on Christianity is chilling, especially given the fact that she can't bring herself to even name the religion." That's what another user on X said. So, again, I mean, this is what has been. I could have brought you several different illustrations or several different articles or snippets of people talking about how terrible that Charlie Kirk was. I had somebody even online, post right after the assassination, how awful he was, and what an awful person he was, and I just asked, what was awful about Charlie Kirk? That's all I asked, and they couldn't even answer anything. Nothing. They couldn't answer at all. All they can do, because they knew what Charlie Kirk stood for, and they knew what he was about, and they knew what he was doing. He was going onto campuses, and he was having conversations, and he was having a back and forth, and he would bring up people that didn't agree with him first. And he would say, let's talk about this. We may end up going, you know what? Let's agree to disagree. I don't believe what you believe. You don't believe what I believe, but that's okay. We've had a discussion about it. We've brought facts. We've brought our opinions. We brought them together, and we spoke about it, and we talked about it, and we had a deliberation. We had a conversation, whatever you want to call it. And that is healthy. But the left didn't want that, because the left can't win at that. And when they lose, they start calling names like this guy. They start lying to you like this guy. And they start getting violence like we saw. And this is what happens when truth is muzzled. When you can't speak, when you don't have that right, when you don't have that ability to talk to even people who disagree with you. That's what happened here. And I would love to hear what you think of it. I just wanted to bring you, I mean, this is just one. This is just like the first one I saw. I just brought up some stuff. Here's this guy. I bring it to you. Let's talk about it. And it's absolutely ridiculous. But I would like to hear from you, and I would like to hear what you have to say about it. And let's do that. Let's have you can always get a hold of us. It's uncommonsensepodcast.com. You can go on to our YouTube page and like and share. That always helps. And thank you for listening. This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.